2024 has seen more challenges in global governance. Regional conflicts and geopolitical tensions have hindered the global economy and international cooperation. How can restoring development return to the top of the world's agenda? And how could new quality productive forces help boost economic transformation? We asked global experts focused on China's economy and its role in the world. Tune in to our special series, The World Ahead 2025.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Today we begin a 2-episode special program, The World Ahead 2025. We're going to have in-depth discussions on China's economic transition in the first episode and challenges and opportunities to global governance in the second. Leading World Bank economists said the world economy has stabilized in 2024 for the very first time in 3 years, though rather weak. And China, despite the challenges to domestic economic recovery and uncertainties in international markets, still contributed significantly to world economic growth. So in this very first episode of our special program, The World Ahead 2025, we have guests who are quite familiar with China's economic transformation while steering through challenges. Before our discussion, let's take a look at what the year 2024 has left the world with.
(2024), with steady progress in China's economy, China's main economic and social development goals are expected to be successfully carried out. Something noted at the recent Central Economic Work Conference held in Beijing.
Now, of course, there are many other factors involved, but at least what we know from our economic studies and economic history is that 5% is feasible.
Data from the National Bureau of Statistics show China's GDP grew 4.8% year-on-year during the first 3 quarters of 2024 to nearly 95 trillion yuan, or about 13.33 trillion US dollars. Industrial output climbed 5.8% compared to the previous year, as robust increases were seen in the equipment and high-tech manufacturing industries. Consumption is also in an upswing, with consumer retail sales up 3.3% from a year ago. The job market has shown stability, with the average urban unemployment rate also down from last year. The Chinese economy is on firm footing so far, despite a complicated global environment, thanks to swift government action.
There are these new policy measures that have been put in place that also helps with raising growth.
In March, the government work report submitted at the second session of the 14th National People's Congress showed that China seeks to modernize its industries with green energy and tap into new quality productive forces at a faster pace. In July, the communiqué of the third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China stated that the country must prioritize modernization and reform. That means deeper, upgraded reform and opening up with harmony between humanity and nature. In September, China unveiled new economic stimulus packages, charting a more sustainable and resilient path forward. 3 key words, passion, patience, and perseverance, are guiding China's dynamic economic strategy.
China is in the middle of an important transition, in the sense that the economic model that helped China to succeed through the last 40 years is going to need to change if China wants its economy to continue to succeed in future.
Next year, China will double down on growing consumption and far more efficient investments. And the world is asking, what will be the economic momentum in 2025?
I'm so happy to be joined on Zoom Professor Jiang Weiwei, who is the Dean of the China Institute of Fudan University. Good to see you, Professor. And Mr. Ian Begg, Professorial Research Fellow of the London School of Economics and Political Science.
Morning.
Meanwhile, joining us here on the stage, Adam Dennett, Secretary General of the European Chamber of Commerce in China, and Qassem Tofali, the president of the Arab-Chinese Cooperation and Development Association.
Good to be with you.
Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. I want to start by asking you about what is your observation of the structural transformation taking place with the Chinese economy right now. After all, we saw imports and exports accounted for a huge % of the Chinese GDP, but now things are changing. Professor Zhang?
Chinese economy has performed reasonably well. I think it will be around 5% GDP growth. It will be larger than the G7's contribution put together, which means over 30%. So this is already very impressive. And when we discuss Chinese economy, I tend to look at this, what we call the new pillars of economic growth. And in China, you find quite a few, including this, what we call the 3 new items, lithium battery, EVs, and the solar panels and modules. So this is all positive.
Well, yes, the model for China over decades now has been export-led growth. And you now see the transformation towards more of a domestic-led growth. It's not by no means complete, but it's a next stage in China's economic development. It's linked as well to the change in the labor force dynamics, because where China was able to mobilize labor from other parts of the country towards the coastal areas in the past, now you have an aging population, and that requires a different approach to economic management, which is going to be more consumer-led, more welfare-led, changes that are quite difficult to enact when you've not been used to it.
Mr. Dennett, you yourself is a personal testament to what really happened in China's economic transformation after being here for more than 2 decades. How do you see mid-2000s, GDP ratio in terms of import-export, still a big chunk, and now much smaller? What do you think is behind this transformation?
Indeed, China was an export-driven economy in the 2000s, but that's drastically changed. I think back then, GDP, trade to GDP ratio was about 60%. It's shrunk to about 40% today. Export still playing the major contribution of the two, down to about, I think, 20 or 1% today. But going back to your original question about a restructuring of the economy, yes, China's making this huge contribution to global world growth, and there's changes in individual sectors, innovative industries coming out, as the other panelists said. What's also happening, which is very, very interesting, is the supply chain. In the past, everyone was relying on China to export to the rest of the world, but supply chains are changing. The environment in which we're in now, with an increased focus on self-reliance and resilience, and following what happened with COVID and with certain wars in Ukraine and elsewhere, many countries are focused on self-reliance. And so what we've seen is a lot more localization, European companies coming to China, localizing here. And for some of them, they're also taking their supply chain and they're going abroad with it as well to serve those markets. So what I find really, really fascinating is even though the Chinese economy has continued to grow and contribute more and more, inside that structure and how those supply chains have developed has changed a lot in the last 10 years.
I hope we're going to have more opportunity to discuss that a little bit more in detail in a few minutes. Go to you, Mr. Kafali.
It's a planned transformation. We have been following for the last years the policies of the government, and especially the 20th Assembly of the CPC, where they highlighted that the next phase in China's development would be a different modernization and maybe a different model of reaching out to the problems that the economy is having. From the side of the Arab countries, we welcome such a move, because we see some common goals together here where we could benefit from some of the industries that China is moving away from, and maybe take it away from our side and develop our economies in such a period.
I guess everybody has their little notebook as to what to do next, right? And what does that mean for their interactions with China? Here I have some numbers on hand. Foreign trade has been, of course, one of the most important pillars of the Chinese economic growth. If you look at the number 2006, China's economy relied most heavily on trade, with total imports and exports accounting for about 67% of the GDP. But now, 2023, that number drops to 33%, almost half. Professor Zhang, I know you have been a cheerleader of China's growth internationally. So how do you analyze, as a scholar, this transformation?
China is actually the largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity since 2014. And so it's exactly 1 decade. China is also now the largest trading partner for over 140 countries. So China is extremely open, extremely international, in the sense that, China is one of the few countries that have indeed benefited from the globalization, in part due to Chinese particular approach, I call the Chinese model, towards the globalization, which means to maximize its benefit, to downsize its defects. So in the end, it's a benefit. If you look at the rising living standards in China, that has a lot to do with China's opening up with trade.
On the other hand, we have seen the global environment evolving. Adam, you hear a lot of international businesses, including many European ones, talking about in China, for China. It's not like before that they are trying to work with China and from here to open up the international market, exporting products produced here in China through joint ventures or through their own operations and exported to the other parts of the world. So how is that transformation? What does that mean for European businesses? And in a way, reflect what's going on right now in China?
Yeah, I still would agree that European companies are still in China for China. But as we've just been talking about, the global environment is such that there is increasing protectionism, there's increasing regulations, there's increasing focus on security, national security. And because of that, many companies that operate here in China, in order to safeguard their market in China, what they're doing is they're increasingly onshoring their supply chain, and they're increasingly developing their products just for the Chinese market. So the focus for a lot of companies here in the past was, yes, to export to the rest of the world, but that's really no longer the case here. We're going to be launching a report in a few weeks on siloing. I think another term for that could be called localization. But we see more and more workforces being localized, IT systems, R&D, and so we live in a very, very different economic structure than we have in the past.
Now, we do see this structural change, not only here in China, but also the landscape change internationally. China-European trade and economic ties is being constantly challenged by issues like electronic vehicles, geopolitics, and the complex structures of decision-making inside Europe and how China has been learning to deal with it. Mr. Begg, how do you see China's transformation, as we talked about, from quantity to quality, now coincides with a very complex backdrop of geopolitics and of bilateral trade?
Well, it's the obvious transformation for China is to move up the value chain. And I think what everybody's saying is it's happening. It's vulnerable because the vulnerability comes from what I might call the two T's, Trump and tariffs. If you have this kind of restriction on what China can export to the rest of the world, and let's face it, Trump is promising to be pretty savage in what he wants to do. China has to find a way of responding to this, and although you can say the Middle East, and maybe more importantly, Africa, is a potential new opportunity for China, if it is somehow pushed out by the machinations of other countries through geopolitics, it is going to be a major challenge for China to be able to continue on the route it's been following.
Professor Zhang, your take.
Well, I think, indeed, open trade is on the whole good for all. But it's also true that in the process of, this transformative change, there could be, difficulties with certain countries, certain partners. So I think best is through negotiations. We should embrace that. I said this is a game changer. The United States should pay attention to that. It's not the old game. It's a new game. The old game is the competition between Koda and Fuji over film. But in the end, it's the digital technology that replaced everything.
2024 has seen more challenges in global governance. Regional conflicts and geopolitical tensions have hindered the global economy and international cooperation. How can restoring development return to the top of the world's agenda? And how could new quality productive forces help boost economic transformation? We asked global experts focused on China's economy and its role in the world. Tune in to our special series, The World Ahead 2025.
Professor Zhang, I remember very clearly Chinese President Xi Jinping had a very famous quote. It's a very short quote. I want to read it. Houses are for living, not speculation. That went viral over the years because it really goes to the heart of the common folks. They want to have their own housing and they don't want it to be overpriced. But that's a big problem for the Chinese economy, the real estate. How is the country resolving that problem as we speak, Professor?
Yeah, and I think, when Chinese leader Xi Jinping made this famous remark, it's very important. As at that time, there were indeed housing bubbles, and we have to squeeze this kind of bubbles to avoid a kind of financial crisis, because at that time, too much real estate business had become financialized. Now we have come to a new stage. It's true that still housing is for living, not for speculation, as the bubbles are gradually squeezed out. So we are returning to slightly more lower interest rate, a kind of package to encourage house purchasing by the real people who really need this kind of housing. So gradually, housing market is warming up again, both in Beijing, Shanghai, in all the major cities in China today.
Mr. Begg, this debate about the role of central government and local governments have been a constant topic in China. So how convincing do you think, so far, this transformation, as Professor Zhang has just mentioned, is to international investors, to the rest of the world, so that it's not looking just at the Chinese numbers, they're also looking at China's long-term potentials, which the Chinese government has been repeatedly said to the rest of the world, look at our long-term potentials.
I think it comes down to questions of governance. As long as governance is adequate, as Professor Zhang has suggested, things are going to look attractive to international investors. But if governance suffers because of vested interests or because of an inability to curb some of the excesses, then I'm afraid you have to think of ways in which you can reinforce governance to make sure the solutions are coming.
And Adam, very briefly, respond.
October stimulus, for example, the Chinese government came out with monetary stimulus. They reduced the reserve ratio by 0.5 percentage points, which adds liquidity to the market, so it gives people a bit more spending money. They reduced the interest rates, and so for housing, if you own a home and you're trying to pay your house back, you've got a little bit less payments to make, you got a little more money in your pocket, you can go out and buy something. The Chinese government has also introduced this refurbishment, old equipment for new equipment. You know, you go on Jingdong, you go on the social media apps, you can get a discount.
旧换新.
Yeah, you can get these discounts of 5-10% off of these. I've seen from our members in the industry that in the furniture sector, in the auto sector, in a number of retail sectors, they've benefited from it. My concern is, though, and I think it'll allow China to hit its 5% target goal for this year. The thing is if you buy a car this year and this quarter, you're probably not going to buy another one for another 5 or 10 years. So it's a good short-term stimulus, but what they need to do is make sure they use this opportunity and this window now to make other structural changes that will ensure further growth in the future.
And I want to also introduce to our viewers right now our guests from another studio, Mr. Ma Jun and Mr. Gao Zhikai. Tell me more about your thoughts on the results of the Central Economic Working Conference and the directions being set there. What does that mean for the Chinese economy?
The Central Economic Working Conference have again highlighted the importance of green and low carbon development. And this year, I think the theme is more focused on the overall green transformation, which means that we need to promote carbon reduction, pollution control, expansion of green, and high quality growth in a coordinated way. So some of the green industries have been highlighted. One of them is green buildings, and the other one is the development of renewable energy and the construction establishment of a whole series of zero carbon economic development zones. I think the working group decision have also highlighted on this idea of trying to tap into the market, the market to promote green transformation.
The most recent, very important economic conference of the Central Committee made a whole range of major decisions, which I believe will have an immediate and important impact on the economic development in China. Why comprehensive? I think China now has reached a critical moment in terms of how to deepen economic reform, how to continue to opening up to the outside world, and how to push for economic transformation of China. My personal reading is that these new policy initiatives are very well thought after, and they are very different from the policy initiatives adopted for the past few years, and it marks a new turning point. That is, China will seize the moment and will strike iron while it is still hot, and allow corporate entities of all kinds to do their best and do their most required things to make sure that China will be fully engaged in the new round of globalization.
So with both of you in the studio, tell me more about your thoughts as to how you're looking at the Chinese economy for the year ahead, 2025.
I hope that that in China we further tap into the power of the green transformation, and also tap into the power of the so-called high quality productive force. The carbon market in China is ready to be expanded. So next year we expected to see that. The rules for a global carbon market have also been approved in COP29, and I hope that next year there will be, all these market-based solutions. We can tap into that and working together with partners in other parts of the world to jointly promote low carbon development.
2025 again, will be a year of major transformation, but also a major restructuring. The Chinese economy will be more and more characterized by innovation, by this dareness to push forward to the forefront of economic, technological, scientific forefront. And I think China needs to really transform itself from made in China to designed in China to invented in China and to imagined in China.
Well, after quite some discussion about many of the factors that are having an impact on the Chinese economy, one of the most important things we want to ask every one of you is, how do you see China's economy for the new year, 2025? Let's start from Professor Zhang.
Thank you. Well, I'm again very positive and optimistic. Indeed, all countries, all major economies are faced with new challenges and difficulties, but by far China is in a better position perhaps than most other countries, other economies, to do a better job.
Mr. Kafali?
I think definitely the Chinese economy will be in a good path for, I would say, solving some of the problems that we just discussed, but looking into the future, the prospect is very good. There will be more concentration from the Chinese side on opening up more into to the world and removing trade barriers and promoting a better future for all.
Mr. Dennett?
The experts, the IMF and World Bank and all those out there, they're predicting around 5%, similar to this year. But my hope is going back to what you just said, and that it's qualitative growth and not just simply quantitative growth, because we're facing many challenges and we can't afford to make mistakes. So more important than the 5% growth itself is making sure that we make the right sort of reforms so that we've got longer term growth for all of us.
Mr. Beck?
I think my answer is that the prospects look quite rosy, positive for China in 2025, but there is clearly a major threat on the horizon, which is what US policy could do to China. And even that has a double-edged effect. It may induce China to concentrate on its own capabilities. The paradox of Trump forcing China to learn how to do new things, but it could also be damaging to China's market prospects.
And that's all the time we have for this discussion, focusing on the Chinese economy and its interactions with the rest of the world. Tomorrow, we will delve deeper into the global expectations for the year 2025. Tune in tomorrow, the same time. That's all we have for this first episode of our special program, The World Ahead 2025. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for tuning in. Bye for now. Thank you.